when a 30-year veteran of the EPA was fired by a form letter. His daughter's emotional plea reached Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who turned a routine budget hearing into a bold challenge to President Trump's claim that federal workers were just fat to be trimmed. The moment her words hit the air, the sterile committee room shifted. Before the hearing even ended, staffers' phone footage of the exchange was tearing across social media. News networks interrupted their broadcasts not for pundits, but for raw video of Crockett holding a letter and staring down a stunned Trump official. This wasn't about budgets anymore. It was about a daughter's letter, a father's dignity, and a government forced to confront its own. Just a week earlier, David Sterling was doing what he'd done for 31 years, protecting water. He wasn't an administrator or a political appointee, just a GS-14 hydrologist at the EPA's Dallas branch. His office was filled with geological surveys, framed topographic maps, and a sun-faded photo of his daughter, Amelia, taken on her college graduation day. At 62, nearing retirement, David took quiet pride in his legacy. He had seen administrations come and go, policies change like the wind, but the water stayed, and he had always been its steady guardian. He believed in the mission. It was real. It was honorable. The anxiety began as a low hum beneath the national headlines, a creeping unease that settled over David Sterling's life as President Trump, now in his second term, pushed forward his vow to deconstruct the administrative state. David had heard that kind of rhetoric before, but this time felt different. Executive orders came swiftly, and mass layoffs followed under the banner of the Federal Workforce Realignment Initiative, which the White House framed as long overdue efficiency. To David and his colleagues, it felt like a purge. Each day brought whispers of who had received the dreaded email, a cold and personal message from the Office of Personnel Management stating, "Your position has been identified as redundant. Your service is no longer required. Thank you for your dedication." It was a digital guillotine. David tried to reassure himself and his daughter, Amelia, insisting his job was essential. "They can't get rid of the scientists," he told her over Sunday dinner. "You can't protect the environment without people who understand it." But Amelia saw the fear behind his words. Her father, the calmest man she knew, was clenching his jaw more often, staring into space, consumed by thoughts he couldn't voice. The tension settled into their home, making every conversation brittle. Amelia, a 28-year-old graphic designer, found herself unable to concentrate, haunted by the sight of her father unraveling. His work was more than a job, it was who he was, and she feared losing it would take a piece of him with it. Then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, the email came. David saw the subject line, "Notification regarding your federal employment status," and his heart sank. He opened it with trembling hands and read the cold, final words that confirmed everything. 31 years of service reduced to 3 sterile paragraphs. No anger, came only a hollow, sinking emptiness. He stood, walked silently past younger colleagues, and drove home in a daze. That evening, Amelia found him sitting in his favorite chair in the dark, the TV off, his gaze fixed on nothing. The quiet anxiety had turned into a deafening roar. He stopped sleeping, began pacing at night, the word redundant echoing in his mind like a curse. How could decades of scientific service be called unnecessary? He stopped watching the news. Every time the president appeared on screen, boasting about cutting tens of thousands of bureaucrats, it felt personal. At one press conference, Trump even smirked, saying, "We're not firing people, we're liberating them, we're trimming the fat." It's what any good businessman would do. The clip played on a loop, and for David, it was salt on an open wound. He was the fat, his life's work discarded like excess. What shattered Amelia's heart wasn't just her father's layoff. It was watching the man who had once been a vibrant, steady force in her life retreat into silence. The father who taught her to identify birds by their songs and trees by their leaves, now moved through their home like a ghost, barely speaking, disconnected from the world around him. The fear in their household had shifted from financial worry to something deeper, the quiet erosion of his spirit. One restless night, scrolling through social media, Amelia stumbled upon a clip of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett passionately confronting an oil executive during a committee hearing. Struck by Crockett's fire and honesty, Amelia, an angry searched for the Congresswoman's legislative director, someone with experience in environmental policy. She wrote an email, raw and unfiltered, not with political language but with truth. Her father, David Sterling, a 62-year-old hydrologist at the EPA, had been dismissed by a cold, impersonal email after 31 years of public service. President Trump says he's trimming the fat, she wrote. My father is not fat. He is a good man who protected the water millions of people drink. Now he can't sleep, he barely eats, and he feels like his life meant nothing. She ended with a simple plea. Is there anyone in Washington who still believes people like my father matter? She sent the message without expecting a reply. But 2 days before a critical House oversight hearing, as Congresswoman Crockett reviewed her legal arguments to challenge the mass layoffs, her aide Ben stepped into her office holding a printout. Congresswoman, he said quietly, I think you need to see this. He said it had come in late the night before. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett took the paper from her aide and read Amelia Sterling's email once quickly, then again, more slowly. The thick binder of data before her suddenly felt cold and distant. Her carefully prepared legal arguments seemed hollow. This letter was different. It had a heartbeat. It spoke not in metrics, but in raw emotion of anxiety, of dignity, of a family's quiet desperation. It gave a human face to the administration's sterile, dismissive rhetoric. Attached was a photo of David Sterling, a kind-faced man with laugh lines around his eyes, standing proudly by a riverbank. This wasn't just background material. This was the story. This was the truth no spreadsheet could capture. Get me everything you can on David Sterling, Crockett said quietly, but firmly, and print me a clean copy of this letter. I'm not using the binders tomorrow, I'm using this. She knew Director Kalen Thompson would arrive armed with charts, metrics, and well-rehearsed talking points. He would speak of efficiency, savings, and bureaucratic excess. He would likely echo the president's line about trimming the fat. But Crockett wasn't preparing for a policy debate. She was preparing to defend a man's life. On Thursday morning, inside room 2154 of the Rayburn House office, building a space that had hosted generations of American political history, the hearing began with an air of routine. At the witness table sat Kalen Thompson, director of the Office of Management and Budget, the embodiment of polished corporate authority. He wore a tailored suit, an expensive watch, and the confident expression of someone used to being in control. Flanked by silent, stiff-backed aides, he fielded questions smoothly, wielding charts and statistics like armor. He spoke of right-sizing, synergy, and maximizing taxpayer value. In his telling, the federal government was an overgrown corporation, and he was the expert brought in to make it lean, efficient, and profitable. The Republican chairman praised Director Thompson's efforts, declaring it was high time business sense came to Washington, a sentiment echoed by several majority members who lobbed him easy questions, letting him repeat his talking points about government efficiency. The Democratic side pushed back, but their arguments focused on union contracts and procedural concerns lacked cohesion, and Thompson deflected them with ease, emphasizing a central theme: the government was too large and needed streamlining. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett waited patiently for her 5 minutes, using her stillness to study Thompson, noting how he never made eye contact with committee members but directed his answers toward the C-SPAN cameras. More performer than public servant. When the chairman finally recognized her, the room quieted. Crockett had a reputation Her voice was calm as she asked Thompson how many federal employees had been terminated, or, as his office called it, realigned. He replied with a practiced smile. Over 75,000. Crockett let the number linger, then asked the average length of service. Approximately 22 years, Thompson answered, uneasily aware of the trap being laid. Crockett pointed out that these weren't new hires but career professionals. And when she asked for the president's preferred phrase for the initiative, Thompson answered, trimming the fat. That was what she'd been waiting for. Crockett's voice hardened as she thanked him, then pulled out Amelia Sterling's letter, not a chart or statute. The room stilled. Journalists stopped typing mid-sentence, and side conversations ceased. Crockett began reading aloud, her voice steady and edged with fury. Amelia's words spoke of her father, David Sterling, a 62-year-old EPA hydrologist fired by email after 31 years of service. President Trump says he's trimming the fat. My father is not fat, the letter read. With each word, the room grew quieter, the weight of the human toll breaking through political theater. Thompson's smirk vanished, his confidence drained as he was forced to listen. This was no longer a performance, it was an indictment. Crockett's voice never wavered. Now he doesn't sleep, he barely eats. He just sits in his chair and stares at nothing. The anxiety in our house is so thick, I feel like I'm suffocating. He feels like his life meant nothing, as if he were just a number on a spreadsheet, casually deleted, without thought or consequence. Crockett paused, drawing a slow breath, allowing the mental image of David Sterling, slumped in his armchair, to settle over the room. The chamber was silent, its energy concentrated, every eye locked on her. He is a grandfather, a husband, and the kindest man I know, she continued. He is the backbone of our family. Is there anyone in Washington who still believes that? People like my father matter. She placed the letter gently on the dais and raised her eyes to the witness. Kalen Thompson looked pale, his polished composure unraveling. The cold armor of corporate language had crumbled beneath the weight of a daughter's grief. There were no graphs or talking points to shield him now. Crockett let the silence linger for 5 heavy seconds, then struck with precision. Director Thompson, she said sharply, I have the letter here from a daughter terrified for her father. I have his picture. She slid a photo of David Sterling across the desk. He doesn't look like fat to me. So I ask you again, is this family fat to be trimmed? Or are they the backbone of the country you're dismantling? Thompson opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes darted to the chairman, silently pleading for rescue. The press gallery erupted in the staccato of camera shutters. The chairman, clearly rattled, banged his gavel. The gentlewoman's time has expired. The witness is not required to answer. But it was too late. The answer was already written. In Thompson's silence, in the fear on his face, in the way the room's mood had irrevocably shifted. Jasmine Crockett didn't say another word because she didn't have to. She simply held her gaze on Director Thompson, letting his silence serve as his confession. Her 5 minutes were up, her job was done. Jasmine Crockett left the hearing. Ruman stepped into a wall of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Congresswoman, any comment on the chairman's remarks? Have you spoken to the Sterling family? Is the White House declaring war on federal workers? She didn't answer. Her face remained unreadable as she moved swiftly toward the elevators, her staff forming a protective barrier around her. The moment didn't feel like a victory, it felt weighty, solemn. She hadn't just landed a political blow. She had exposed a family's private anguish to the world. It was, she believed, a necessary act of truth-telling, but one that left a bitter taste. By the time she returned to her office, the clip of her exchange with Kalen Thompson had gone viral, dominating every news outlet. Online, two opposing hashtags began trending. The administration's supporters pushed hashtag #TrimTheFat, recycling memes of government excess, but they were quickly overwhelmed by #backbone of the country. That phrase, Crockett's words, had ignited something. People across the nation began sharing their own stories. Teachers, firefighters, postal workers, retired civil servants, all rallying to defend the dignity of public service. Amelia Sterling's letter, transcribed and reposted millions of times, had become a national call to attention. Crockett's office was flooded, phones ringing non-stop, her exhausted staff scrambling to keep up with the tidal wave of calls. For every message of support, there was one laced with hatred. The emails were worse, a chaotic deluge of gratitude and venom. Some called her a grandstanding partisan, others a truth-teller, but many simply called her what she hadn't set out to be, a hero. Detractors hurled language so vile it made Crockett's youngest intern physically ill, and threats were quickly logged and forwarded to Capitol Police, a grim, routine part of the job that now felt far more menacing. The battle had spilled beyond the polished setting of a committee hearing. It was raw, personal, and dangerous. Late that night, long after her staff had gone home, Jasmine Crockett sat alone in her office, the glow of her computer screen casting shadows across her exhausted face, the weight of the day finally settling in. The loneliness of political life crept in, being seen as a symbol, not a person. She called her mother in Texas. "I saw you on the news, Jazz," her mother said, with pride and worry in equal measure. "You made me so proud. You spoke for that family like they were your own." "Thanks, Mom," Crockett replied, her voice raw with fatigue. It was a long day. Her mother's tone turned serious. "You did the right thing, but be careful. They don't fight fair. Don't ever forget that." "I won't," Crockett promised, comforted and warned all at once. She was fighting for the soul of the country, but the risk to herself was very real. For a week, the White House fought back. The president called her a disgrace at a rally, and the press secretary branded her a theatrical, overly emotional politician who exploited a family for attention. Kalen Thompson had vanished from public view, reportedly on pre-scheduled leave. The moment Crockett had created seemed doomed to be drowned out by partisan noise and media frenzy. But then, unexpectedly, the shift came not from Washington, but from a local Nebraska newspaper, where Representative Marcus Thorne, a 10-term Republican and respected former Marine, finally broke his silence in an interview that would change everything. Marcus Thorne wasn't known for fiery speeches or headline-making moments. He was a quiet institutionalist who kept to tradition and rarely stirred national attention. But when a local reporter asked him about the trimming the fat controversy, his response, calm and measured, landed with the force of a tectonic shift. "I wasn't in that hearing, and I don't know the specifics of that EPA employee's case," he began, "but I do know this: the men and women who served this country, whether in military uniform or in federal roles, deserve our respect. My father worked for the Department of Agriculture for 40 years here in Nebraska. He inspected grain elevators. He wasn't fat. He was a patriot. We must be careful that, in our zeal for efficiency, we don't forget the honor in a lifetime of quiet service." The quote was picked up by the Associated Press and, within hours, became national news. Thorne didn't attack the president or defend Jasmine Crockett. He defended the dignity of public service. His rock-solid conservative record made it impossible to dismiss, giving other Republicans the cover they needed to voice their own discomfort. The White House's attempt to frame the issue as Crockett versus Trump crumbled, and the national conversation shifted from partisan theatrics to something deeper: respect versus dismissal. That shift led to a major network offering Crockett a primetime interviewer, rare opportunity to shape the narrative. Sitting across from a high-profile anchor under intense studio lights, Crockett stayed composed as the host tried to spark conflict. "Congresswoman, the president called you a disgrace. What's your direct response?" She didn't flinch. "This was never about a war of words," she said, clear and resolute. "This is about something much bigger. Whether we See government as a service rendered with integrity or just another business to be gutted for profit. The people who test our water, inspect our food, and deliver our mail aren't just bureaucrats or expendable figures on a spreadsheet. They're our neighbors, our friends, the quiet backbone of this nation. When their life's work is reduced to a dismissive catchphrase, we don't just dishonor them, we lose a part of who we are as a country. My goal was never to win an argument. It was to defend the dignity of people like David Sterling. 3 weeks after the hearing, the Sterling family sat together in their living room, watching a replay of Representative Thorne's powerful interview. David watched closely, something flickering in his eyes, something that had been missing. The heavy fog of anxiety that had weighed on him for weeks began to lift. He felt seen. He felt remembered. His life's work mattered. Then the phone rang. Amelia picked it up. It was George, an old friend from the EPA, and another casualty of the agency's restructuring. David took the call, hesitant at first, but as he listened, something shifted. His back straightened. His voice grew stronger. A volunteer effort to monitor the Trinity River Basin needed him. Pro bono, he repeated, pausing, absorbing the weight of the moment. Then, with clarity, he answered, "Yes, I'm in. Send me the details." When he hung up, he looked at Amelia with a genuine smile, one that reached all the way to his eyes. "Thank you," he said, 2 words filled with more gratitude than 1,000 speeches. He wasn't just thanking her for standing by him. He was thanking her for giving him back his purpose. The anxiety didn't vanish, but it no longer controlled them. It had become resolved. David Sterling's service hadn't ended, had been reborn. A man cast aside by a distant bureaucracy had been reclaimed by the very community he had quietly served for decades. All because someone had refused to let his story end in silence. So, what does it really mean to serve your country? Is it only found in moments of spotlight and ceremony? Or is it found in the humble, steady work that keeps a nation running? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that go beyond the headlines.